Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move House File 778 be referred to the General Register.
So moved.
Mr. Chair, members, in your packet, you do have an amendment that I'd like to offer at this time, if that's all right. A17 amendment.
I'll proceed.
Members, M&B in their fiscal note had expressed some concerns about how the language is currently drafted. This language addresses some of their concerns to meet the issue on tax liability and so forth, and I'd like to move that at this time.
Motion to adopt the A17. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? The bill is amended as, and please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that you're all very familiar with this issue. What this piece of legislation does is address the Minnesota Sports Facility Authority concerns that we've had over the probably 2 years with the structure of this, and changes the structure to have legislative input into it on a greater level, as well as directing the distribution of the stadium suites that have been part of this process as well. Those are kind of the two highlights of it. If members want to get into greater detail, I'm happy to do that. But that's it in a nutshell, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Questions? Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Anderson, thank you for working on this. I share a lot of your concern about this, and I do think that it needs some additional oversight and some additional tightening up on what goes on there. My question, well, I have a few questions, but one is about the portion, I'm trying to find it here, where you are giving the Vikings, giving the suites or selling the suites back to the Vikings. I think it would be. Let's see, where is that here?
Section 9.
Section 9. Thank you. Anyway, my question really is, if we're looking for a way to make sure that the public gets maximum value from these suites that right now are there for the use of the Stadium Authority. And I think I share that goal with you. And so the question would be, why give the Vikings some kind of special ability to have access to this resource that right now belongs to the public, essentially? Why not sort of have the suites available to the highest bidder for various events? You know, I know there's a, let's see, I'm not finding it right now, but you know, I think there was a reference to market value here. But really, market value is something that is determined by who's willing to buy. And so I'm wondering whether you would consider, or whether you have considered something like that, rather than kind of giving the Vikings some sort of favored status. Surely there are businesses or other kinds of groups that might want to come in and bid on having a suite for a game or for the season or something like that, and even when the other kinds of activities are taking place. My concern is that the public get maximum value out of those suites, and there could be a license for that, and it could be a license that reserves some ability for the Stadium Authority to use a few seats if need be. Could you just talk a little bit about how you came to the method you've got in here for dealing with that?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Liebling, I'm going to direct you to page 5, lines 12 and 13. And on there it says the stadium suites could be returned to either the primary tenant or other interested parties in return for fair market value. And we had it drafted because I did not assume that it would go to the Vikings. We wanted to make sure that we get the best bang for our dollar, and so it could be, like you said, any of the entities that you had mentioned. Because we want to maximize the payback return for this, because that benefits all taxpayers in the state of Minnesota. So it was drafted in to address the very concerns that you expressed.
And Mr. Chair.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Anderson. That is helpful. I guess it's the wording, a return of all stadium suites, which I don't know if, maybe that needs to be tweaked a bit, because I don't know if I would consider it a return. I would think of it more as perhaps a leasing of the suites. But I think we're kind of on the same page in terms of what we are really looking for to happen. If I could, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have another question for Representative Anderson. Representative Anderson, why can we not directly use the revenue that we might get from this portion that we just discussed? Why can that revenue not go directly to help pay off the bonds that have been used to pay for the stadium in the first place, so the public's share, if you will?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Liebling. If you look in the fiscal note on page, starts on page 3 and on page 4, MMB has expressed some concerns about the federal tax regulations on the bonds that were issued. And so that's why I did the amendment to address some of those concerns and trying to work through that. And Mr. McCormick, if he's here, if he wants to, we can talk about that in greater detail. But MMB has has identified this. The amendment is meant to address those concerns that they have set forth.
So, Mr. Chair.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Anderson, could you just give a real brief explanation, or maybe Mr. McCormick needs to, of how it's structured now with the amendment, where the funds will go and how that will work?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as the amendment says, it transfers the funds to MMB and creates a special revenue account, and then allows the funds to go back to the MSFA if approved by the Commissioner of MMB for public purposes.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, maybe we should take this offline. Thank you, Representative Anderson. I'm still kind of not understanding why it can't go back to pay off the public share. That would be my concern, but I will talk with you about that offline. Thank you.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the bill, Representative Anderson. I plan on supporting it. I just had a quick question on lines 2.7 and 2.8 related to the representation from the city of Minneapolis. I didn't support public financing for this stadium to begin with, but it's in our city, and we have a lot of issues around a variety of issues as the host city for this. So why reducing our representation from 2 to 1 member?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Hornstein. Overall, there's been concern about the size of the commission itself, and I recognized that early on, that they didn't want it to be overly cumbersome. And so to be able to limit the size and keep it somewhat close to the original board makeup, the original board is 5 members. We increase it to 7, and rather than going to 8, we'd be at an even number, and that creates problems as well.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Anderson. I understand that, but in looking at the other, I know you have these various appointees, et cetera, but I hope that moving forward we could look, if it's a 7-member board, to at least have some additional representation from Minneapolis would help, because again, our special status as the host city, I think, is helpful to us to be able to have that kind of representation.
Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up a bit on Representative Liebling's line of questioning. I, too, support the bill. I think what we want to be assured of is now these suites mean there is more revenue available, and we want to see, are we assured it's going to the public and not further to enrich the Vikings? And so as I look at the amendment, so I understand MMB thought it can't go into the general fund. It's that tax issue. But if it goes into the stadium reserve excess account, maybe I misunderstand, but is that account going to be used for operating and maintenance of the building? And does that take some pressure off the Vikings, who would otherwise have to operate and maintain the structure? That's the confusion I have.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Hausman. I share some of your concerns. I wanted to go back to paying off the debt in a faster way, but this does not benefit the Vikings as you've laid out, because actually MSFA is responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the facility, not the Vikings.
Any other questions? Seeing none. There's no further discussion. Representative Anderson renews her motion to refer HF 78 to the, as amended, to the General Register. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. And the bill is on the way to the General Register. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.